Wow, it is so great to see all of you, mask and all. It's just wonderful to be back together. And I just had breakfast with the IOs and I told them I kind of have a love-hate relationship with these masks. They've obviously saved lives, but they're also a hassle. But I have another twist to it, which is that my quarantine occurred with our 2 dogs and my incredible wife, Stacy. And there couldn't be a better person to be in quarantine with than Stacy. I know all of you did not have that luxury, but we spent a lot of time together, and a few weeks into the pandemic, Stacy said to me as I was wearing a mask, she said, "Mark, you look great in a mask." And I should have just taken it as a compliment and let it go, but I drilled down a little bit, and turns out she thinks that it covers up the imperfections in my face. So we will be enforcing the mask mandate here at the conference. It's really hard to believe that it was just 2 years ago that we were in Orlando. I mean, honestly, it feels like 10. So much has happened. You've been through hell and back, and unfortunately, this battle isn't over yet. And that's why we're so grateful that you've been able to take some time out to spend a few days with us here. We hope you have a chance to relax and have fun. We know you'll have a chance to reunite with friends. And most important, we hope that you get reinvigorated and go back to your buildings and, let's put this pandemic behind us. There are so many tragic aspects to the pandemic, but nothing, of course, comes close to the tragic loss of human life. We've lost over 100,000 residents in skilled nursing buildings and assisted living buildings. We've lost over 2,000 staff. I doubt there's a single person in the room that hasn't lost a loved one to COVID, and we thought it would be appropriate to start our conference out by taking a brief moment of silence and holding these people up as you think about the folks that we have lost. Thank you. We owe it to them to finish this battle off. I became aware of COVID in a big way when Kirkland hit. I knew about COVID. I think I first read about it in January of 2020, and it seemed like it could be bad, but it was over in China, and there were very few cases in the United States, and it really had not sunk into me what it could mean for our country and what it could mean for us until Kirkland. Now, you remember Kirkland, Life Care Building in Kirkland, Washington, became the first building in the country, maybe the first building in the world to be hit with COVID. The headlines were everywhere, international headlines about Kirkland, the horrible tragedy there, the fear that it caused in so many people. Once I heard about Kirkland, I knew we were in for the fight of our lives because I studied it. And I learned 3 things in my studies. The first thing that I learned is that even good buildings were going to get COVID. Now, despite the way it might have been portrayed in the press and what might have been said by our critics and by plaintiffs' lawyers, Kirkland was not a bad building. Kirkland was not an average building. Kirkland was and is an exceptional building. It was a 5-star building with no history of infection control problems, 180 employees, 120 happy staff. It was a building that any of us would have been proud to have been associated with. And yet it got COVID. It was a great building, not by accident. It was a great building but because of leadership at the corporate level and leadership within the buildings. And one such leader was the infection control nurse, Alice Cortez. When I talked with folks at Life Care about Alice, and here's a picture of her, they describe her to me as the best infection control nurse that they have ever worked with. Well, we might not have been thinking very much about COVID in February of 2020, but Alice was. She began to notice an unusual increase in upper respiratory infections at the facility. Now, this is normal, of course, for that time of the year because of flu, but Alice was concerned. She immediately implemented all of her detailed infection control protocols. Sanitizer was placed in the front of the building and throughout the building. She had in-services with frontline staff and with leadership teams, talking to them about the precautions they needed to take because of these increased infections. Residents that needed to go to the hospital were sent to the hospital. If they could be taken care of in the building, they were isolated to their rooms. They were fed in their rooms. Their rehab occurred in their rooms. She did everything. The tests started coming back negative for flu, and she became concerned that maybe this was COVID. She quickly did an internet search and found that the internet at that time believed that you could only get COVID if you'd been to Wuhan, China, that there were at most 15 cases in the entire country. The president was saying that they would all be gone in a matter of days. There was only one recorded case in the state of Washington. There was no history of anyone in the building that had gone to China, and yet she continued to be concerned. She called state officials, she called county officials, she talked to people at the hospitals, to the clinicians, and she said, hey, there's something going on here. We need some help, but there was no help. There was no protocol from CMS or from CDC. She was flying on her own, and she did an exceptional job by continuing to implement infection control protocols. In the middle of February, just by happenstance, there happened to be a survey of the building, and there were 0 deficiencies on infection control. She continued to call public health officials, and they either didn't call back, or when they called back, they said, it's not COVID, you're doing everything that you need to be doing. She actually closed the building to visitors because she became so concerned before there was ever a positive COVID test. Well, at the time, testing was very infrequent. There weren't tests out there. They were still being developed. But there was a hospital in the state of Washington that became a test site for the test itself. And one of the Kirkland residents was in that hospital. And on February 28th, they tested positive for COVID. And that is when we learned that even a very good building could get COVID. We then learned our second thing from Kirkland, and that is that if you get COVID, you're in real trouble. Because it wasn't one resident, it was over 100 residents and staff that tested positive. And ultimately 40 of them died. The final thing that we learned, sadly, is that no matter what you've done to prepare and to fight it, we were going to get blamed. So CMS did what they should do. They sent in a team of workers. They should have sent in a team of workers to help because so much of the staff had to leave, but instead they sent in huge survey teams that spent 400 hours of Kirkland's time on surveys when everyone was trying to figure out just what in the heck is going on. They collected thousands of pages of documents, and they issued over $600,000 in civil monetary penalties. That is when I knew we were in real trouble. This virus could spread quickly, it was incredibly deadly, and there wasn't going to be a lot of help from the federal government. At that point, as a sector, we had a choice. We could have either given up or we could have fought. Now you might say, Mark, giving up was not an option. Well, actually, there are some parts of the world where when COVID hit, the employees got scared and fled, and the residents were left to fend for themselves, but not here. You made the decision to persevere, to not quit. And we fought on through 2020. And at that point, 2 themes developed. The first theme was unity in DC. We didn't know if our members would abandon us because of the fear of their businesses crashing. They didn't. Not a single member quit. As we sit here today, we are more unified than ever. We are at record membership because members have not left us, they have flocked to us. And it wasn't just the members that were united, it was our vendor partners. Our business model depends upon the millions of dollars that we get from our business partners to then spend on lobbyists and political activity, and we had to cancel every event last year and this year until now. But our business partners stayed united. They gave us the same amount of money, in some cases more, than they'd given us even when we had meetings. So we stayed unified in DC, and as a result of that, we were able to not spend 1 penny less on government relations, we spent more. Not 1 penny less on lobbyists, we spent more. Not 1 penny less on political activity, we spent more. Not 1 penny less on media, we spent more. And I went to Cliff Porter, our great head of government relations, and I said, Cliff, look, I'm not going to tell the members this, but I think every building in the country might end up getting COVID. When you look at what happened in Washington and when you look across the country, I don't see what's going to stop this. And we can't go up to the Hill and just ask for a 2 or 3% increase like we normally get. We've got to ask for billions of dollars. In April of 2020, Cliff and I set a goal of getting $10 billion for the sector, an unheard of, audacious amount. And we didn't know if we could get it. But because we stayed unified, because you stuck with us, because you provided us the resources, because our vendor partners did the same, we were able to win all of the things that you see up here on the screen. And we didn't just achieve $10 billion for the sector, we recovered $20 billion for the sector. Now, when I think about the story of 2020 and 2021 and COVID, if the whole story is this long, the unity in DC is like this much of it. All of the rest is what you did. You and your teams persevered. You never gave up. And because of that, you saved thousands, possibly tens of thousands of lives. Now, we should have known from Kirkland that this would happen, because the same thing happened at Kirkland. On February 28th, the night that they got the positive test, they sent out an urgent email to the other buildings in the Kirkland area and said, look, we got a problem. About half of the staff in our buildings aren't going to be able to continue to work, and we need some people to come in and to pick up some other shifts. They didn't know if people would come. Keep in mind, this was a time, if you think back, where getting COVID felt like it was a death sentence. They didn't know if people would voluntarily come into the middle of this incredible fire that they were experiencing. Well, they did. The response was overwhelming. One such employee is a nurse named Chelsea Ernest. Chelsea was the director of nursing at a building about 40 miles away. But she wanted to help. She wanted to come right into the danger. So she signed up and she came in and she worked the night shift that night, and she thought that it would just be a single night shift and then she would go back to her other job. Well, that night shift turned into 21 straight night shifts at Kirkland. And it wasn't just that. When the night shift would end, she then worked 21 straight day shifts because they needed her as an interim DON during the day. They needed her on the floor at night. Finally, after 21 days, the management said, look, Chelsea, you got to take a day off. So she took a day off, and then she came back, and she worked for 21 more straight days, 16 hours a day, 4 hours of sleep. She did that for 4 months. Another person that answered the call was the CEO of LifeCare, Todd Fletcher. At the time, Todd ran the Western Division for LifeCare, but of course, when the positive test came out, it was all hands on ship, so Todd quickly got to the facility. At the facility, Todd didn't just do the corporate stuff of managing the press and managing the survey. As I talked to employees at Kirkland, Todd did everything. The ultimate servant leader. They said Todd would do whatever needed to be done. He would get coffee. He would take out the trash. He would answer call lights. He would clean bathrooms. He did everything. And he did everything 16 hours a day for 4 months. And that is just representative of what happened, not just at LifeCare at Kirkland, but at all the nursing homes and assisted living facilities across the country. You and your teams refuse to give up. We got to the end of 2020 and we thought there was light at the end of the tunnel. The vaccine came along. And with the vaccine, there was hope. And I'm sure that all of you have memories of your vaccination clinics, the tears of joy, and the thought that finally we had this thing behind us. We came into 2021 and we thought this will be the year of recovery. By the time we get to conference, everybody may be back to normal. We'll have COVID behind us. Maybe census will come back. And then, unfortunately, the Delta variant hit. And there are so many things that have been discouraging about the Delta variant, but one, it's just the reality that we're still in this fight, that this battle isn't over yet, that maybe it will never be over, that COVID will be an endemic problem that we'll always have to fix. So we're now at the same crossroads that we were in March of 2020. Do we give up or do we fight? And the obvious answer is that we fight. The Delta variant is not going to crush our recovery. It is simply going to pause it. We're going to go from where we are right now. We're going to put this clinical nightmare behind us, and on the business side, we will recover. Now, I know it is dangerous for any politician or former politician like me to predict what's going to happen with COVID. Hasn't worked out very well for the folks that have done it. Governor Andrew Cuomo would be, Exhibit A. He writes a book about it, and you know where he is right now. And I think our New York folks would say, hey, maybe there's a little karma going on there. But I will tell you that the probability is that we will grow our census from here, that the workforce problem will become slightly better over time, and we won't be at a complete recovery by the end of 2021, but we'll be in better shape than we are right now. And by the time we get back together and hold our conference in Nashville this time next year, the probability is that things will be back relatively close to normal. Now, there's a lot of work to be done between now and then, and we're going to do it by doing the same two things that we've done all along. The first is that we're going to have to stay unified. You are not allowed to drop your membership in AHCA NCAL. And vendors, you need to keep writing us checks, because if we can stay unified, we will continue to get the wins that we need to get at the state and the federal level. And the second thing is that we need to do is that we need to persevere. I know it's got to be incredibly hard to keep going after almost 2 years of this, but trust me, if you can hold this together and fight through this for another year, we're going to be fine. And we're going to put the greatest pandemic in the history of our country behind us, and you will eventually look back on this as the most important work that you've ever done. Now, I'm going to close with an opinion that I'm 100% sure of. And that's rare for me, because as I've gotten older, I'm less sure of things than I ever was before. I tell folks that I mentor, try not to be sure of too many things, because there are twists and turns. I'm 100% sure of this opinion. And my opinion is that Alice Cortez and the tens of thousands of infection control people and clinical people like Alice Cortez that prepared our buildings before the pandemic, that had the protocols in place so that we could react, that were thinking of things far in advance of any of us, and that then when the pandemic hit, did everything they could to save lives. Alice Cortez and the tens of thousands of your employees just like Alice are not villains, they are heroes. And Chelsea Ernest and the hundreds of thousands, I guess almost millions of our employees that stayed working in our facilities even after COVID had hit, particularly early on when we had no PPE, we had no testing, and it felt like folks that were getting this were dying left and right. Chelsea Ernest and all of your employees that stuck it out and that ran to the fire to help, they are not villains, they are heroes. And finally, for all the C-level folks out there, the folks that aren't in the buildings, it's been very different the last year and a half. And I know that almost all of you have been in the buildings, fighting on the front lines, doing the frontline work, uplifting your staff and the residents. Todd Fletcher and all of you, the folks that have worked and continue to work day after day after day, are not villains, you are heroes. And it's really for that reason, the incredible work that you've done in saving lives over the last year and a half, and that I know you're going to continue to do as we put this behind us, that working for you is such a great honor. And you've heard me say that every year. But the last year and a half have really made it more than a great honor. It's become the most important work that I've ever had the opportunity to do. And I will tell you that because we know that you will never quit, the 90 of us back here at AHCA NCAL in DC, we won't quit until we put this behind us. Thank you very much for your doing. God bless you and have a great convention. Thank you. Now, I actually have one more thing. We couldn't bring all of our teams here for obvious reasons. It'd be so great if we could show them, what we think about them. It'd be so great if we could show all the employees at LifeCare Kirkland what we think about them. We can't do that, but we can sure show Alice Cortez what we think about her. Alice Cortez, a person described as the best infection control nurse that people had ever worked with that did such an exceptional job. Alice, would you please come out here so that our members can tell you what they think about you? And Chelsea Ernest and the hundreds of thousands of our employees. It'd be great if we could recognize all of them. We can't do that, but we can sure recognize Chelsea. Chelsea, would you come out here and let our members know how they feel about you? And last but not least, on behalf of all the folks that flock to buildings, an incredible example of servant leadership. Todd Fletcher, would you please come out here so we can show you how we feel about you? God bless them, all of you, and let's have a great convention.